for Ivory Innovations. I guess I got a little title bump recently. And I have 3 of our finalists for the Ivory Prize and our winner here with us today to talk about what they are building when it comes to financial inclusion, affordability, and better paths to homeownership for many people across the country. So that's enough of me. If you're curious to learn more about Ivory Innovations, you can go to ivoryinnovations.org, and there's a lot there. We have a lot of team members here, and we're thrilled to talk to you. Our mission is to catalyze innovation in housing affordability, and everything we do, including working with these amazing organizations, does just that. We have a lot to cover today, right? The financial industry is not one that necessarily has innovated when it comes to housing affordability for a very long time. Of course, there are many programs, there are many products, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And so I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to get into some really interesting questions about what does your organization do? How do you get buy-in for that? And how do you scale an innovation, again, in an industry that is often slow to change? And at the end, we'll throw it to the audience for some questions. So, Aisha, I'm going to start with you to introduce yourself very briefly. Who are you? What's your organization? What's your tagline?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Aisha T. Weeks, Managing Director for the Dearfield Fund for Black Wealth, and we are seeking to close the racial wealth gap for Black and African American families in the Denver metro area and beyond.
Perfect. Tamara.
I'll hop on in. I'm Tamara Knox, the CEO and co-founder of Frolic. To put it short, we're working with single-family homeowners to redevelop their land and build multifamily cooperatives that both they can afford to have a unit in, their children can, and their community can. So helping generational renters move into home ownership and start to build wealth.
And Jon?
Hey guys, I'm Jon Lawless. I'm fortunate to be an advisor with Ivory Innovations. Let me start by saying that psychologists often say you should practice expressing gratitude, and so I try to do this every morning to remind myself that I'm just a poor kid from Akron who's lucky to be on a stage like this in a room with such amazing people in a country where we have the freedom and the means to actually solve hard problems. I know we have our problems, but we're all really blessed to be here, and I just wanted to first say thank you to Ivory Innovations for letting me represent Bilt Rewards. In a nutshell, Bilt Rewards is trying to tackle a really difficult problem, which is how to make renting rewarding. And we feel we've done that in a sustainable, scalable way by building loyalty programs. So think like your Marriott programs or American Airlines. We built a loyalty program specifically to give renters rewards, mainly building credit and earning point rewards so that they can then use those towards the down payment on a home.
Perfect. Well, I think this is so fun because, as you probably just heard, even from these short introductions, we have really the path of ownership. We have Jon working with renters, we have Aisha working with buyers, and we have Tamara working with owners, right? So you have each part of the home ownership journey from I don't own all the way to I do own, and how we're innovating along that. So let's go in that same order. We'll turn it back to you, Jon. So what challenges do renters face today, and how does Bilt address that? This is the question of how it works. Tell me a little bit more about what you're doing, but in more depth.
Sure. So let me start with the challenges that renters face. A friend of mine wrote an article where he used the analogy of playing Monopoly. And he said, so imagine you're playing Monopoly, but you get there late. And everybody else has already bought up all the properties, and the rules are that you can only move one space at a time. So all you do is go from place to place renting. If you do get lucky enough to be on a space where you could buy the property, you're out of money. And so to steal a term from economics, renting sucks, especially for a long-term homeowner. And so Bilt's really set out to try to figure out how to fix this problem and give something back to renters for paying rent. And we've done that first and foremost by creating what we call our Bilt Alliance. This is a group of multifamily property owners. They represent about 2 to 3 million units right now and growing. And we basically become the platform through which renters make their rent payment, right? You imagine all those clunky platforms that you usually have to use as a renter. We just are a beautiful, easy way to pay your rent. But that allows us to do several things. Number one is we can report your rent to the credit bureaus. So now by paying rent, you're actually able to increase your credit score. And the second thing that we do is we give renters points for paying rent. We give every renter 250 points every time they make a rent payment. And on top of that, we create all sorts of interesting ways to earn more points. So for example, we have a deal with Lyft. If you happen to live in a Bilt building and are a Bilt member, you can link your account to Lyft and get 2 points for every $1 you spend on Lyft. We have a number of those types of relationships so people can earn even more points just by being part of our network. And then we also offer for our Prime customers a Bilt MasterCard. The Bilt MasterCard allows you to earn a point for every $1 you spend on rent. It's the only credit card where there's no transaction cost. You use it to pay rent, and you can earn points on it. And not just points in rent, you get 2 points for every dollar you spend in travel, 3x for dining. It's really an incredible program. And what makes it all valuable is that our points are truly meaningful. We now have the most valuable loyalty point in the entire industry. Throw those American airline miles away, the Bilt point's where it's at. And that's because you can use it for travel, you can use it for fitness programs. We're one of 8 companies you can link your account to Amazon and spend points on Amazon. But most importantly, you can also use your points towards the down payment of a home. The average renter rents for 10 to 13 years, and after that amount of time, earning points, you get a huge chunk of cash towards your down payment, which is really amazing. So kind of putting it all together, you're building credit, you're building your savings. We offer a bunch of tools and content that I write for our platform to educate people on financial literacy and home buying. So we really created that end-to-end path to home ownership. And don't just take my word for it. We've got 1 million members now, all of who are excited to be on our platform, and we just continue to grow. And so ultimately our goal is to change that awful game of Monopoly I just described and make it so every time you go and have to pay rent, you're actually getting really cool stuff for it. So that's Bilt Rewards.
Thanks, John. And to borrow John's term of renting sucks, buying also often sucks. And I want to turn it next to you, Aisha, to talk a little bit more about the Dearfield Fund and how you work, how you came to be, and also specifically to the Dearfield Fund, why are race-specific targets? Because the full name of the Dearfield Fund is the Dearfield Fund for Black Wealth. And so why are race-specific targets needed when it comes to setting up programs that aim to increase home buying power?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So in terms of how the Dearfield Fund for Black Wealth came to be, it's a fund that's currently being incubated at Gary Community Ventures. And I think like a lot of folks during the pandemic, after the murder of George Floyd, really there were a lot of folks that were, and organizations, looking at doing a lot of soul searching around like what can we actually do to just improve the economic and financial conditions of Black and African American families in this country. So went out and actually spoke to the Black community in Denver, held focus groups and the like, and really began to also lean into a lot of the data that was showing that Black families only have amassed 10% of the wealth of the average or median white family, and also hearing the same thing being resonated at those focus groups to say, we want to have an opportunity for home ownership. And so I think things really clicked in terms of where the community was with their ask and then like what the data was showing us. And so, really looking at home ownership as the pathway to wealth building. It's not the only pathway, right? It's small business ownership is also a great pathway to home ownership. But when you look at the most accessible, and also when you take into consideration redlining and historic discrimination as it relates to families for decades being systemically kept from owning a home and building wealth in that pathway, it just kind of really came together and made sense. And so when you look at the targets of why the Dearfield Fund focuses on home ownership for families, is that just the discriminatory practices that were enacted by the federal government, so this was sanctioned by our government, was very targeted in its approach. And so what we've seen is that a widening of the wealth gap shows us that blanket solutions have not worked. And so if the discrimination was targeted, then the solution also needs to be targeted as well. And so for us, we really lean into that in terms of focusing on Black families. So the Dearfield Fund for Black Wealth provides up to $40,000 in down payment assistance to provide that on-ramp into the American dream. And so when you look at families who are able to call up their granny or call up their auntie and say, hey, I'm about to buy a home, and then they're blessed with a large check for that down payment, most Black families do not have access to that family member or that friend to be able to provide that capital. So we're standing in for what for a lot of communities is kind of like a natural thing of being able to have access to that generational wealth. And so the question becomes, how do you have an on-ramp if you don't have someone who can kind of help you along that journey? And so we are privileged to be able to help families along that journey. Thus far, we have helped 150 families gain access to home ownership. We've deployed $5.5 million in capital capital towards our fundraising goal as well as our deployment goal of $20 million. So I will leave it there. Did I answer all the questions?
That answered all the questions. I think if you're curious for more details, the Dearfield Fund is an amazing model that we're really excited to see scale across the country. It's structured as, I believe, a soft second mortgage. It's a revolving fund so that when there's a refinance event after 5 to 7 to 15 years even, that funding goes back into the pool to help even more Black families in the Denver area. So you can learn more, and I'm sure Aisha can explain more, but I'll turn it next to Frolic. So we've gone from renters to buyers to owners. And so now we're going to talk about how you help homeowners and co-develop co-op models that enable new ownership opportunities at really affordable prices. And so how do you do that? Are you using traditional financing? How does it all work?
What a deep question. I think just kind of taking it back to the roots. So Josh over there, who's filming, thank you. We both started Frolic 4 years ago out of MIT, and it really was born out of research that we're doing from the Department of Urban Studies and Planning and then the Center for Real Estate. And I mean, we all, there's just this wave of upzones happening. So we are seeing it in our research, we're all seeing it living inside of cities, and just, I don't know, there can be a lot of fear in it, and there's also this incredible opportunity of when cities are upzoning land, and they're doing so for very good reasons to try to have this more supply and help address this housing crisis. There's all this new value potential. So if you have a plot of land and all of a sudden you currently have one home on it, but you could have 5 or 10 homes on it, that's all this new value. So in this upzone, huge new value creation, but also just all this land is being unlocked. And so in our research, we were looking at things like we're all here in this room and we're talking about different models and ways of doing things, looking at people in the US and in Europe and just learning from different practices of ways to do development and have ownership models to be really supportive of the people inside of communities and to be less extractive. And where am I going with that?
How does it work?
I think, so it starts with a homeowner. So there's a lot of people sitting inside of their homes, and so they have a lot of equity in their homes. And so you have this plot of land that you're able to build all these new units on it. But often what happens is the developer comes in and buys the land, and they need a lot of cash for that. And that just completely excludes the homeowner that's living there. And so this is kind of going back now to the research question that we had, was really thinking about how do you have this moment of all this additional supply that can get created while making sure that the communities that are currently living there and have been living there, that are the roots of the communities, like the people, the actual people, can have a future there. And then thinking about, okay, well, you're building all these units. Who are they for? Who can actually afford to buy them? So there's 2 aspects of what we're doing. One is partnering with homeowners to co-develop their land and helping them kind of dream up a project. And then there's our ownership structure, which is allowing for so co-ops. I think I just kind of want to go into co-ops for a moment, if that's okay. I don't know how many people in this room are familiar with co-ops, but what's incredible about them is that I think that all of us here are trying to think about how do we help more people move into homeownership, because it is this way to build wealth. And it's really hard to come up with $100,000, $200,000, what's needed in a lot of the really expensive markets to buy a home. So with the co-op ownership structure, what ends up happening is you have a homeowner, they put a down payment. For us, it's $10,000 to $30,000 is the down payment, and then they get a mortgage for their home. But because we're building multifamily projects, the project as a whole, in the same way that an apartment structure is able to take out debt, the project is able to take out debt. So they're able to go to conventional banks and get debt on the entire project. And those banks are never really looking at the individuals living in the homes. So what a co-op is able to do is bring in multiple layers of debt. Now I'm getting really technical, so I apologize. But it's really allowing that initial equity that a person has to be enough to be able to access these buckets of capital and to be able to purchase homes and then to be able to start building wealth. And what's very, very important is it's what happens once you own a home, which is a lot of what you were talking about yesterday was all these training programs and thinking about owning a home is scary, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong and a lot of expenses that come up. So with the co-op model, you're able to have low down payments. You're also able to be putting money into reserves every month. And then you're creating this really powerful financial tool. And so this project, where I'm talking about it can take out debt to initially capitalize itself, it has the ability to keep doing this over time. And so these homes end up really retaining their value and just getting better. So you can build balconies, you can just continuously evolve what this project is over time. So now I'm going on for too long, but I'll back away. So,
No, this is fun. And I mean, I'm sure so many of you are curious about probably these different models that we have up on stage. And so please talk to us, come learn from us. We're learning every day. I'm curious, so we've talked about how it works. Now I want to move into the question of how do you get buy-in, right? How do you get buy-in for something that's new and different in an industry that has done many things the same way for a long time? So Tamara, I'll turn it back to you because you're not just working on financing innovation, right? That's part of what you do, but you're also developing new housing products, right? Co-ops are not super common outside of New York and DC, right? We don't see that many of them on the West Coast or in central parts of the country. And so what is it like to get buy-in from communities as you're embarking on this new idea?
I mean, I think there's the purchasing of the co-op, which is just homeownership in general is confusing. And there's a lot of co-ops in different places in Europe. It's very, very common. In New York City, and if some of you know people there, a lot of people often do own co-ops. There's also just the buy-in of doing a development project. So that initial homeowner to be redeveloping their land, that is scary. That is your nest egg, your asset, this thing that is your protection going forward is the idea of putting that at risk for something that you can't quite see yet is a really enormous leap. I think often when you're in these spaces and people are coming up with different ideas and solutions to very complex problems, it's trying to implant this very particular idea onto people and asking people to take the things that they're used to and that are bringing them comfort and really your question of the co-op. So a co-op is I have to step into this space that I'm unfamiliar with. And I think just what I'm trying to get across is that instead of, you start with a homeowner, and instead of saying to them, okay, you have to go build this co-op, this very particular thing that has this very precise design and situation. Instead, a lot of our work is partnering with local communities and really, in a sense, allowing them to understand the resources that they have ready and using the co-op structure and this development process more as a tool that they're able to use to help make what they're dreaming of start to sprout and happen while interacting with then the conventional banks and the permitting process and making sure that that is very smooth and all the professional systems are able to look at it and understand it.
So I think that multi-dimensional stakeholder, right? You're just illustrating with your hands how many different people are in that model. And I want to ask the question to you, Aisha, too, right? You've got kind of a two-sided part here, right? You have to both convince funders, hey, this is a worthwhile use of your capital. And you have to convince home buyers, right? Many people who have been betrayed by the system, right, over generations, or have been part of a housing or ownership system or buying system. So what is it like to work with those two different groups? And how do you build trust, and what might others in this room learn from you as they think about Dearfield?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think you identified two stakeholder groups. So we really do have at least three, and that is the financial institutions that we partner with on the first mortgage side. So beginning with them, I think that they're obviously critical to the process, but one of the ways in which we partner is that the Dearfield Fund outlines guidelines, underwriting that we want to abide by. And considering my banking background and also kind of having a community development lens for my work in local government, I know that financial institutions are eager to partner and kind of obviously increase their lending. But I think that is incredibly important, and the rigorous nature in which we vet our financial partners is really critical to understand, one, what is their engagement process in the community, I have conversations, and I think that some of the lenders or brokers or mortgage companies really think that Dearfield partnering with us would be a smoking gun to solving their how do we help, the Black community, and really taking a deep dive on, no, you need to have your own outreach strategy. We'd like to know what that is, how are you embedded in the community, and not just utilizing this resource as a way for them to kind of hit their numbers, and taking a deeper dive on that has been incredibly important for us. As it relates to funders, like you said, a new venture is always, I think, scary, not only just for homeowners, but it's scary for investors as well. But I think what the feedback that we've gotten, because we have conducted a first close, so we've had investors such as Robert Wood Johnson and other foundations, as well as high net worth individuals. And one is really looking at the gap in the market, and they really believe that Dearfield, considering that we go and we help families that are at 140% area median income, when traditionally you will see that in other down payment assistance programs capped at 80%. Well, why does that matter? It's because a Black family can be firmly in the middle class but still not have the assets and access to generational wealth for home ownership. And so that, for me, has been a recognized pain, even in my past life, of trying to convince banks to, be able to provide assistance outside of that. And so there was a tremendous gap in the market. And I think that what also resonates with them is our wraparound services. So we have pre and post purchase. And for us, I think that the critical difference is the wealth advisory services that we're building. I tell people that there's a playbook on how to help families buy a home. You have HUD certified counseling agencies all over the country that are kind of doing that in a very targeted way. There's no playbook that exists that shows Black families how to actually build wealth, generational wealth over time. And I think that if we could figure out what those pillars are, and we're recruiting those from the financial sector in terms of advisory for us as well as for our home buyers, to have a holistic approach to financial inclusion, and also building that comprehensive wealth book. So we can get that right here, right? Prove that out. Can you imagine just spreading that around the country, right? In terms of what actually works. And then lastly, I'll just say that the outreach strategy for our clients, really gaining that buy-in and trust, like you said, coming and being very transparent to say that there has been decades, if not centuries, of hurt there, and dare I say trauma, that has been embedded based on the financial practices that have happened. And so generationally, you inherit, these ideas that the system was never built for you, so that distrust happens. And I think that it's important to go in knowing that we know that, and also knowing that we have to meet people where they are. And so in terms of our outreach strategy, in terms of our staff, being very sensitive to that, we kind of come very transparent and being able to speak to those fears, and year over year, and really understanding how we can make that impact the relationships.
Thank you. And Jon, I'm going to turn it to you as well. So, with Bilt, when we talk about getting buy-in, it's really easy to see why renters are excited. I imagine, is anyone here a renter? I know we have some students in here. Who rents? Are you convinced that you should sign up for Bilt? I mean, not really the strongest pitch I haven't heard in a while. But so renters are probably pretty easy to convince to sign up. You've got over 1 million of them on your platform. But how do you convince landlords? Right? How do you convince the people that actually have to deploy these systems and possibly give up some cash in the process of doing so? Why is that worth it? So tell us a little bit more about that side.
Yeah, happy to. And by the way, I wish I could just listen to you guys talk. What you guys are doing is just so amazing. I feel like you guys should go on forever. But anyway, it's a little time to really get into your models. On convincing landlords, it's actually easier than renters. What we offer property owners, first of all, is a free platform that renters can pay through, which creates a great experience for the renter, and they don't have to pay for it, which they typically do. We also do rent reporting to all 3 credit bureaus for free, so they don't have to pay for that. They're getting a lot of pressure to do it, they get it for free from us. On top of that, we're creating a loyalty program that engages tenants so that they can actually feel good about where they're renting because they're earning something from paying rent. And then lastly, we actually offer the opportunity for our property owners to buy points from us to basically incentivize good tenant behavior, which further drives down their operation costs. Not to mention, they can use it to incentivize good behaviors like taking financial wellness classes or lowering their energy usage. So now not only are they getting reduced operating costs, loyalty from tenants and lower turnover, but they're getting massive ESG credit on that side. So it's really an easy sell to property owners. And Cindy, the buy-in that we really have to get, which has been going tremendously well as well, is just getting more people to offer more rewards to our members. Getting a lift to say, oh, wow, we've got 1 million renters who are engaged in your platform. We'd love to engage with you and buy points from you and give more rewards to your renters. And so that's really where we are. I mean, we're scaling fast. We're full tilt on growing our alliance, growing our network, and we have no competition right now. I mean, it's a really incredible opportunity for us, and so we're really grateful for where we are.
Amazing. Well, let's talk about scale. That was a good transition. So I'm curious, I guess maybe going back to you, Tamara, at Frolic. You've talked about how you got started in Seattle. Well, you got started at MIT, but I think your first market is in Seattle, thinking about the aftermath of some of these upzoning changes. And so, of course, this is happening across the country. I'm curious, as we think about scale, not only geographically, what other markets are you thinking about, but what does it mean for a homeowner as we think about scaling that impact over time? So what is the impact to a homeowner of co-developing with you, and how does this support affordability over time? So kind of two questions there, markets and then also the longevity.
Yeah, love the way you package that. I guess just starting with the homeowner, I'll throw Mary as an example, one of the homeowners we're working with. She currently has $450,000 in her property. It's partially just her payments over time, and then also living in a neighborhood where it's been upzoned, so the value of her land has risen in value. So she starts off with $450,000. She develops the project with us, and at the end of it, she's going to have a home, a newly built home that's worth $300,000. She's just going to buy it outright. She doesn't need to go get a mortgage. And because she's a part of the development process, she's also making money the way that any other investor would. She's getting a return on that. So she has her $300,000 home. She's having $200,000 in cash. And then, the thing that's incredible is that her monthly payments are then cutting in half. So she's going from a home that she was struggling to keep up with and was losing its value because she didn't have the money to keep putting into it. Her property taxes had skyrocketed, and it became a very scary and dangerous situation to your monthly expenses cutting in half, like having a bunch of extra cash to handle life doing its thing. And so the question of scale, I think that one thing, so the model we built, we're developing projects ourselves, but we're also helping local organizations and other developers across the country kind of borrow different assets or different tools that we've created, different pieces of the puzzle. And so part of my mind with scale is also just like product type. So believing a lot in these small 6 to 10 unit projects, and if we can have, we only need about $400,000 of cash to build a project. That's $40,000 per unit that we're building of cash that we're having to go out and raise because they're taking advantage of conventional bank debt and that homeowner equity. But what happens when you start to go into the conversion space? Once you have larger buildings that are able to then convert into co-ops and able to then have the tenants that are there maybe then purchase the homes and kind of that shift. So there's the product side shift. We're expanding to California right now, so it's kind of the geographical change. And a lot of it is also just working with different jurisdictions and all the laws and different complicated things, and so adjusting the model to be able to work within different dynamics.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That really makes sense. Well, and really, I think the thing that I'm really curious about, and I'll open it up to questions from the audience soon enough in just a couple of minutes, but is how do these models support affordability over time, right? It's something that has been more or less baked into your models, and what does that start looking like? How do those benefits accrue? And so maybe talking about kind of big picture, Jon, I'll turn it to you. What does the landscape look like for renters moving forward? You see a lot of doom and gloom in the papers and the news and the headlines of, renting's never been more expensive, costs are going up, people are locked into these interest rates, so there's fewer houses that could be bought on the market, which means that people are renting for a longer period of time, as we've discussed, renting sucks, et cetera, et cetera. So what do things look like moving forward? Of course, we're focused on solutions. So tell us a little bit about that.
I meant to bring my crystal ball, but I left it in my bag. I'll say, look, there's 44 million renters in this country. Renters have always struggled. Their cost burden has always been high. I do actually think, and what a lot of economists are saying right now, is that rents aren't likely to go up as quickly as they have in the last year, thank God. And that's because the biggest demographic in history, the most diverse demographic in history, the millennials, are now thinking about home ownership. One of our biggest demographics, that 30 to 35-year-old range of renters, and all of them are highly engaged in this idea of buying a home, right? Their proximity to the local bar is no longer as important as proximities to the parks and good schools. And so, I personally believe that remote working becoming so powerful at an exact time when cities are really expensive and millennials are looking to start families, I think it's going to really create a new landscape for housing, for rent. Baby